Good Chodesh, good morning. And so there's no better time to discuss a sugya. There's no better time to discuss a sugya of Safek than Rosh Chodesh Adar, especially Rosh Chodesh Adar Beis, where the month of Adar is infused now with a doubled form of Safek. We find that there's so many questions as with regards to where is the essential nature of Purim to be found, Adar Aleph, Adar Beis. Ultimately, the famous Sam Sofer that says, well, the mitzvahs derabanan of Purim were not neskabel in Rosh Chodesh, in Adar Aleph. Nevertheless, the orientation towards the deoraisa of Kiyum Divrei Soifrim of Chanukah and Purim are shaykh to the first Chodesh, meaning to say that Purim exists in the first Chodesh of Adar, but in truth, the derabanans are reflected in the Chodesh of Adar Beis. But there's sveikos, and there's doubts as to what the nature of these months are. Ein Bain, the language of Chazal when discussing the differentiation or the lack of differentiation, a profound language of Ein Bain, there's no distinction rather than, other than, so kind of showing the fact that there's differences, but connections through those differences. Either way we slice it, the month of Adar is a month where we orient ourselves towards doubt and the role that it plays, and then when there's an Ibur Shana where there's even more orientation towards doubt, it's kind of a second level of doubt. And part of the element of doubt that infuses the month of Adar, as we're going to see, is the fact that Adar is the time where we prepare ourselves to encounter the arch nemesis of Klal Yisrael, the enemy Amalek that finds itself at any crossroads that the Jewish people actually encounter in their lives. I was saying last night that when you look at Svarim and you're trying to understand the orientation of what is Amalek, you're trying to pin down the nature of what Chazal or what the rabbis or what the Bali Chasidus or Bali Panimya saw as Amalek, you ultimately come up more doubtful than it was beforehand, because everybody has a different opinion as to what Amalek is. It's a bechina of forgetfulness, it's a bechina of death, it's a bechina of nihilism, it's a bechina of temptation, it's a bechina of trying to be not from enough, meaning Amalek can be found in every iteration of whatever the Mechaber was describing. And when one encounters that, one can look at a sugya like that with ridicule and say, okay, nobody knows what they're talking about, Khalila. Or we can try and say, if everyone's saying something different about Amalek, then it must be that the very nature of Amalek is that it can manifest itself in many different ways. And that each mechaber, each tzaddik, each person who's encountering the nature of Amalek is going to be grasping Amalek through their lens. Ishbitz and Radzin have a framework of what Amalek is, and it's that whenever a person is in a process of some element of spiritual success, there comes along a tipping point where a person will either push against the preventions that lead to more success and fall back down, or they'll push forward and continue to break on through to the other side and continue with success. There's always a pivot point. And it's at that pivot point where the Nakuda of Chisaron is almost smelt. Amalek smells that there's a transition taking place, and it's specifically at that place of the corners, which is really just a connection between a previous stage and the next stage, but not a place itself. That's where Amalek is going to be encountered. The general framework of Amalek, in spite of the fact that Amalek can be identified in many ways, the way that our tzaddikim seem to be magdir Amalek in the most essential type of term is that it's oriented towards Safek. The gematria, the most unarguable point of it. Rav Kook said that remez is re'ei mazeh. When you're looking at numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. If there's a numerical equivalency between the root letters themselves, that bespeaks a deeply held unity. Sometimes those unities will be understandable, which is an understandable gematria. Other times it will just be something that we have to identify as there's a shared root at the core of these two ideas. But the gematria of Amalek is the gematria of Safek. And this idea, more so than really many other gematrios, has taken hold. That people, when they identify Amalek, when they think about the nature of Amalek, the mind goes to that place of Safek. We see it already in the attack that Amalek comes and gets the Jewish people specifically after we have some semblance of clarity, some semblance of Kriyas Yamsuf. Hashem has to make a Kriyas Yamsuf in order so that we can believe in Him for like a minute in this world. Because the reality of this world is so in stark opposition to the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's reality, that it takes a Kriyas Yamsuf, it takes a nace, as the Ramban says, to really just give us an insight into what's really happening each and every day. But after Kriyas Yamsuf, we had a moichin, we had clarity. There was a sense that Hashem created the world. Not only that, but Hashem continues to create the world and run the world in a revealed way and a concealed way, in two parallel streams that are perpetually connected at the heart of each other, as the Ramchal points out at all times. The upper unity and the lower unity. Balatanya, all the tzaddikim spoke about this. But ultimately, that all of the differences that we see are ultimately connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the secret of Kriyas Yamsuf. Amalek comes along, and they orient us to a sense that maybe not everything is rooted in Hashgacha Pratis. Maybe there are things in this world that are theoretically extraneous to Hashem's plan, God forbid. Maybe there are things that don't fit within the narrative, God forbid. And it's in that place, so that pivot point, like we said, that transition from Mitzrayim back into Eretz Yisrael, it's at that pivot point that Amalek comes and attacks, and Bnei Yisrael ask a question, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. Is Hashem with us, or is Hashem not with us? Is Hashem revealed in this place? Is Hashem not revealed in this place? And there we find the first iteration of Amalek's true power, which is to create the doubtful nature as to whether Hashem is with me in this moment or Hashem is not with me in this moment. Now, Amalek doesn't have a koyach of its own. Amalek is a koyach in the Bria. Amalek is a koyach in the Bria that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought into reality, just as Hashem had to be mitzamsim himself and conceal himself in order to give birth to reality where we can function. Emergent with that, and Rav Hutner really explains this throughout many of his ma'amarim, comes the nature of Amalek. Amalek finds itself all the way back up to the very origination of creation, because you cannot have Bechira without Amalek. There has to be a momentary lapse of judgment that can potentially conceive of a reality that is devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's Amalek. And so that is rooted high above in the original thought of creation, so to speak. And it finds its first expression where? In the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. The Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra is the first iteration of this question that Amalek is going to ask of Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. Is Hashem with me or is Hashem not with me? And again, whichever derech a person comes to that question, b'derech mechkar, b'derech tanach, b'derech Torah Sheba'al Peh, b'derech Hasidus, b'derech Agra, b'derech experience, b'derech relationship, one will come to that question in every moment of consciousness, in every hour, in every day, in every year of one's life. We live with this question. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. This is the question at the heart of human experience, which must always perpetually be overcome on the side of Emunah, rather on the side of Amalek. And this process, this split nature of reality, is rooted all the way back into the deliberate or accident, or the accidental deliberate process of the Chet of the Eitz Hadas. And the origination of the Chet of the Eitz Hadas is Hanachash Hasiyeni. The Nachash came along and created this process of seduction, this process of this slow and steady lapse into the loss of awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. And the Arizal points out, that Tzaddikim point out that Hasiyeni, Hanachash Hasiyeni, is the Osios Yesh Ayin. Hayesh and Ayin. Meaning, again, it's the original expression of that question that will emerge later on through the lens of Amalek of Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayin. Is Hashem with us or is Hashem not with us? Hanachash Hasiyeni. Because the Nachash, Amalek, and Minachash Yatzat Safa, that from the Nachash comes a certain poison. Poison is the Gematria Tzadi Pei Ayin, which is also the Gematria of Amalek, which is also the Gematria of Safek. That Amalek is found already in the Nachash itself, because again, these are not monsters, these are not things that somehow slipped out of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unified wholeness that holds every prat in proper balance. These are simply the moments where HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that these are the expressions that are necessary to allow history to unfold in the way that it needs to unfold. It's the Leshem Shabbat V'Chaloma's yahrzeit this week, and his entire Torah is ultimately about trying to understand the role of the Nachash and Satan and Amalek and all of these ideas and how they fit not nicely secondarily into the system, but how they're very fundamental parts of the system itself. Or and Choshech, Yesh and Ayin, Tzimtzum and Giloi, Hester and Revelation. And the Nachash comes along and he asks, in this birthplace of human experience, of the doubt between, is Hashem with me or is Hashem not with me? Now, it's not surprising that just as there's so many interpretations of what Amalek is, and each mechaber has their own grasp of what Amalek is, you see this again in a sugya by the Chet of the Eitz Hadas as well. If you want to understand the system of a tzaddik and how they're going to understand the unfolding process, especially in Sefer Bereshis, look at their interpretation of Chet of the Eitz Hadas. Now, thankfully, the way Torah develops throughout the generations is that there are notions that become first principles, and then those first principles are where the second postulates are built upon. So the Arizal, the Rambam's understanding, and the Moira, the Gra's understanding, Rashi's understanding, Sforno, the tzaddikim who made it into Mikros Kedolos, that we have a basic orientation as to what Chet of the Eitz Hadas was, as to what a Malik is, but from there on, each and every person has their own orientation. Because again, each person lives in their own universe, and each person lives with their grappling with the question, is Hashem with me, or is Hashem not with me? And so, just as by a Malik we see this enumeration of possibilities of what the issue is, we also see the same reality by the Chet of the Eitz Hadas. And again, we see it's always the question of Yesh and Ayin. Is Hashem with me, or is Hashem not with me? It's no surprise then that in Ishbitz and Radzin, which are not chidushim, they're the baseline from which the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, theoretically, in my understanding, needs to be understood. Ishbitz and Radzin are the starting point, and once you kind of learn the postulates of those tzaddikim and Rav Tzadok, then you could begin to understand what all of the Talmidim of the Magid were saying and the Baal Shem Tov was saying. But without the first postulates of Ishbitz and Radzin, a person is going to continue to try and pretend that life is a clarified thing, that we're meant to have absolute clarity in this world. And Ki'ilu, there's some possibility of absolute certainty, and as a result of that, we spend our whole lives trying to chase some foreign notion of certainty. And yes, Havadei Shemo Kein Tila, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is certainty itself, but that's not a certifiable certainty. That's a choice that we have to believe in that certainty. But because we can't grasp that certainty of Hashem, so we look for certifiable certainties in this world, objects, substance, behavior, positions, whatever it is, because we so desperately live with this thing that some real clarity or certification exists, and I'm the one who's missing it because I'm not getting there properly. That's what happens if you learn Chasidus or Pnimius HaTorah without the introduction of Ishbitz and Radzin. But with the introduction of Ishbitz and Radzin, which is also just the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, someone just mentioned right before the name Mickey Rosen, Schus V'Yogan Aleinu, who wrote a book, a tremendous book called The Quest for Authenticity, on the life and the Torah of Rav Simcha ben Pshischa. And again, so the Torah of the Ishbitzer Tzadikim and the Torah of Katsk and the Torah of Gur and all of those Torahs, they come from a place, but Ishbitz and Radzin ultimately come and say, there is no such thing as absolute certainty. The human being is not meant to be perfect. And the problem with so much of our struggle is that we live in this notion of that the perfection or the certification or the certainty is possible, and therefore every time we don't have it, we feel shameful about it and we feel that it's out there, and then we transition from a world of spirituality into a world of spiritual capitalism where I'm just trying to buy the next thing that's going to satisfy me, get the next thing that's going to bring me to my certainty. Ishbitz and Radzin first and foremost reveal that there is no such thing as certainty. The human being is by definition mechusar. The human being is incapable of grasping havadai shemo kein tilaso in some certain way where there's no distinction. Before Chet of the Eitz Hadas, maybe there would have been some relative position of certainty, but certainly not absolute certainty. Absolute certainty is only by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Human experience is always ultimately self-reflective and therefore tied up in some element of doubt, which is really the Cartesian logic of I doubt, therefore I am. It's not I think, therefore I am. It's not I contemplate or I conceive of ideas. It's I doubt, therefore I am. The ability to question the validity of my thinking is what proves my most functional human expression. And in Ishbitz and Radzin, this is the birthplace of faith. Avram Avinu starts questioning, and it's the very questioning, the doubts at his heart that orient him to realize that if there was nothing that was meant to be here, why would I have doubted in the first place? And the doubt itself becomes the seat from which a person develops emunah. But Ishbitz and Radzin take for granted that we cannot fully grasp certainty, and therefore our spiritual lives are a process of moving from levels of concealment into levels of clarification. Places of hiddenness into places of things being revealed. Places of doubt and questioning and not knowing into places of having some element of knowledge. And so Ishbitz and Radzin, they were so radical in this notion that they created a language. This language is not found elsewhere. It has its roots in Tikkun Zohar and Tikkun Mem Zayin, where the tree of knowledge, good and evil, is referred to as the Ilana de Irbuvia, a tree of admixture, where it's not clear where one ingredient ends and the other begins. There's a mixed up, muddled up, shook up world. But what Ishbitz and Radzin say is something incredible. They refer to the Eitz Hadas Tovera as Ilana de Sveka, the tree of doubt. Nobody uses that lashon. It's not, the Lashon is not there. It is there because Ishbitz and Radzin were a Gilui of Torah Mechadash, as each base medrash is. They reveal new ideas. But so the essence of human experience is to be in a state of doubt. The state of doubt, generally speaking, of not knowing with absolute certainty whether it's A or B. Not knowing if I'm looking at the world from the tools of logic and wisdom, I will never come to a place where I am absolutely certain as to what the essential nature of reality is. And it's an easy argument to make. It takes away the ability for a person to really argue with that, because everything ultimately, and I'm going to save time for questions at the end, Bezras Hashem. But in the end of the day, the only thing that is not contingent is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything else is contingent. Everything else is b'mikra. Everything else is inessential. Everything else is efshari hametzius. It's a possibility. The opposite possibility can exist as well. To say that anything other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoido yuv'atzmo kavyachol is of absolute necessity is kfira. Rabbi Nachman says that through the act of hispoidedus, enough, if a person comes to a place where they empty themselves out fully to allow Hashem to move through them in their experiences, so then a person can have a language when Chazal say mitchayev benafsho, that a yid can live with the notion that I am muchuyev hametzius kavyachol, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a moment, because Nishmas Yisrael is so strong. But everything else is contingent. And as a result of its contingency, we live post-chet of the Eitz Hadas in the mindset of the lahat hacherev hamisapeches. The lahat hacherev hamisapeches, that rotating fiery sword that blocks re-entrance into Gan Eden. Because what's the nature of the rotating fiery sword? It's a singular blade that the kruvim are placed in front of Gan Eden to prevent the human being from going back in there and partaking of the Eitz Hadas. And what it is a fiery sword that rotates so quickly that it begins to appear that there are many, many blades. It's like the tire on the road that's moving so fast that it appears to be standing still. And what that means is that the thing blocking me from entering back into Gan Eden is not that there's no moment in which I can enter back into Gan Eden, because there's really only one blade. And if I were to time myself properly and use the tools of precision, then theoretically I'd be able to get over that. But because it's moving so fast, I'm never quite sure, is it there, is it here, is it there, is it here, is it there, is it here? And a person's life is tali b'safek, without clarity, without the knowledge and the tekifus and the confidence that I need in order to realize that no, I know with certainty that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as such, everything is okay. Because we can't access that, we live in the place of, I want to know that, I want to believe in that, I know that I believe in that deeper than anything else, but in the end of the day, that certainty is far from me. And that certainty belongs only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avadei shemo kein tilaso. And so, yes, Amalek is doubt. We look at Amalek as something that must be overcome, and a person is searching for clarity. And when looked at as a negative symptom of human experience, where I need clarity, then doubt is something that must be overcome. We look for hachra'ah. There's A and there's B, and I'm not sure what the option is, and therefore I'm going to use the best tools that allow evidence to develop to give me a particular position as to assume why it's A over B or why it's B over A. Rav Shimshon Hirsch, Zchusa Ganalenu in Chayrev, when he's describing the Svara of Rov, basically says that this was the Rachamim Rabim, this was the compassion that HaKadosh Baruch Hu enabled Chazal to have by allowing us to live with a functional model of Rov, of majority. That the basis of that Svara is simply that certainty is an impossibility. And because certainty is an impossibility, at best we can live with a lechatchila perspective of Rov. Meaning to say that the fact that I can't have absolute certainty is not a symptom of some human frailty. It is the very nature of what it means to be a human being, to cultivate tools of clarifying safek and coming to live in a world of safek. The entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh is about this. The sugya of Sveik Sveika, the clarification of a muddled up wisdom that has fallen down, that needs to move through human experience and the human lens of framework to uncover a kernel of truth. This is what the Balatani describes as the Isuk in Limud Torah in Torah Sheba'al Peh is V'yetze Yitzchak Lasuach Basadeh Lifnois Arav. That Yitzchak, that place of the doubtful Av, the Yitzchak, is he dead, is he alive? His Afar is Munach al Mizbeach, but at the same point he's walking down, and the only way to react to that absurdity, this impossibility, is to laugh at it. Yitzchak is severe, but at the same point it's the birthplace of laughter, because it's that point where a person comes into contact with, I quite literally don't know whether it's here or there. I don't know whether it's here or there. I don't know if it's up or down. It's an olam hafuch ra'isi. And v'yetze Yitzchak l'suach b'sadeh, the sadeh is the place of Torah Sh'Bal Peh, the Sisei Shidrei Mishnah, where there's overgrowth and there's thicket and there's koitz v'dardar, where real truth is not revealed in a direct way, and now there's an entanglement. And the avoida of Kashi and Teirutz and all of the birurim of Torah Sh'Bal Peh and the lumdis, the conceptualization of the mind as the place of clarification of divine truth, becomes the process of being mevar safek. Amelus HaTorah is mevatel, the amel of Amalek, as the Ramchal points out. That Amalek is the reason that there's a concealment on Torah, and the only way to be mevarer, that klip of Amalek, is to take safek itself and utilize it to create Torah Sh'Bal Peh, to create all of the svarim that we have. How many biurim are written on Kuntras HaSveikos, on Shara Yoshar, on the Svarim, on Takfu Kohen, the Svarim, as the Taz says in Hilchos Sveik Sveika, he says that at the beginning of Takfu Kohen, I believe, that, I don't know, but he says that without the Sugi of Safek, we would be missing nearly half, if not more, of the entirety of Torah Sh'Bal Peh. So it can't be that the Safek that we live with on a symptomatic level of not knowing and the indecision that blocks us from moving forward, that we attribute to Amalek, it can't be that that's the whole story. We can't get rid of Safek. Safek is the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. What we have to do is we have to learn how to redeem Safek. We have to learn how to be matir ourselves to live with the Safek. The Ramah brings, it's originally, as I understand, I mean, through Sfaria, my research is through where Sfaria, quotes the source first, but the first iteration of the teaching of Ein Simcha Ka'ataras HaSafek is from Biur Haradak on Tanakh. But the tzaddik who takes it and utilizes it countless times is the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis. Rav Moshe Isserlis, who is the Poisek Achron for Bnei Ashkenaz, as Rav Hutner wrote in a letter, Ubnei Yisrael Yoitzim Biyad Rama. Even though it ends with a hey, the implication is that Golus HaTorah is the expansion of Torah and the dissemination of Torah into random kind of sparks of randomness that have no connectivity, that the Torah won't be found in one place. Avada, the Torah won't be forgotten, ki lo tishkach mi pizaro, as Rashbi says, but in the end of the day, it won't be found in one place. So Memela, any tzaddik or posek who comes along and brings the Torah back to one place, like Maran Harav, like the Mechaber and the Ramah, that they bring it back to one place, that's a process of Ge'ulas HaTorah, which is why we live in a generation of Hadfasas HaSvarim, that the more books that are available, the more wisdom that's available, the more the Torah can be connected into one singular place, which is why, we're in a base medrash of Hadfasas HaTorah, Boifen Nifla, and Hashras HaTorah, and Hispashtis HaTorah, and all of that, as Ram Duvali points out, and the Ramchal points out, Rabbi Nassan pointed out, that the printing of Svarim itself is a harbinger for Geula, because you're gathering together wisdom back to a singular place. But so the Ramah is the posek. What's a psak? A psak is taking the letters of Safek and refining it to the degree that a person now has a way of acting. The psak does not undo the Safek necessarily. The koyach of the posek is that it acknowledges the reality of Safek, and it also uncovers the tekifas of hachra in the heart of Safek. There's clarification, which is moving from ignorance to knowledge. That's still operating in a place of knowing. But when there's there's no clarity in the end. The koyach of the posek is that they have the ability through das Torah, through das Moshe, and through the smicha of the Talmud on them, that they have the ability to be mapshit the safek, to deal with the fact that there are two possibilities, and to live as if there's only one possibility. Secret of Elu v'Elu divrei Elokim Chaim. And so when we look at this language of Ein Simcha Ka'ataras HaSafek, so the general way of looking at it is that there's no joy like the undoing of doubt. Which would imply that if I look at Safek as the symptom of Amalek in my lived experience, where I don't know if they're still with me, I don't know if I'm loved, I don't know if I'm okay, I don't know, where we live with all of those negative Sfekos, which Avada we have to undo with every ounce of our power. But it's not because Safek is ultimately a bad, ultimately destructible thing. There's nothing that's ultimately in need of destruction. Even Amalek, as Rav Tzadok says, the spitz tikkun of Amalek is coming to realize that there's no such thing as something that doesn't have an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in it. That the bearer of Amalek is coming to the place that such a thing can't truly exist, that they don't actually exist. They exist. It's Hashem's miracle that such a thing like Amalek could theoretically exist, to force me over and over to come to realize that no, there's nothing without Hashem. There's nothing without Hashem. And so yes, we have to let go of those sveikos hatachtoinim, but we have to also learn to live with safek as being a Jew in a world where the clearest form of encounter is not going to necessarily be knowledge or clarity, but rather going to be faith and acceptance. Positions that are rooted in doubt rather than positions that are rooted in certainty. Certainty is power. Doubt is powerlessness. It's an acceptance. It's a willingness to live as if I have certainty in spite of the fact that I know that I don't have absolute certainty, and only avadei shemo kein tilaso. And so we're not undoing safek. We're not only erasing safek. And we could understand the language of ein simcha kahataras safek. Hatara means making something mutter. Anu matirin lihit palel im ha'avaryanim. We're not saying the avaryanim are out of here. We're saying we give ourselves permission to live with the avaryanim, to pray with the avaryanim, to be present with that place, to accept that place. Matirim, making it mutter. So ein simcha ka'ataras ha'safek is also, it doesn't just mean there's no joy like the undoing of doubt, but there's also no joy like the acceptance of doubt, with living as a doubtful creature in a doubtful universe, and from there to start avodas Hashem, to make room for the doubt. Rav Kook, Schus Yagan Aleinu, at the heart of Reish Milin, not by the Aleph Beis, not by the Tamim, Nekudos, or Tagin, but in the Shoirish of the Osios themselves, he says, by the letters Aleph and Mem, which is aim and also im, meaning the relationship that one has to the place that's above them is always going to be cut through with a certain element of questionability. The mother, the place, Bina, that I'm rooting myself back to, at the very same moment, because it's a source, I will never have absolute clarity of that source, and therefore the mother is the same etymological root as possibility, as im, as questioning. And Rav Kook says as follows, he says that safek has the same root as sipuk, as satisfaction, histapkus. And Rav Kook doesn't explain fully why this is true, but as I understood from what I understood from reading the words of Rav Kook, is that the connection between safek and histapkus is that it's only when I come to realize that I am a doubtful creature in a doubtful world, at least after Chet of the Eitz Hadas, which is the Ilana D'Sveika, it is my responsibility to accept the fact that there's doubt, to know that I'll never reach absolute certainty, and at that point I can learn to live with satisfaction. If I am prisoner to some idealized promise of absolute certainty, where there will be something beyond emunah, as if there's ever going to be a place where I don't need to have a leap of faith to believe with Mesiras Nefesh and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides that that part of the game is over. But no human being has any fathomability of that. All we know is when the grasp of our knowledge ends. We know how high we can go, and all we can say when we get to those highest places is what we can't say. As the Leshem Shuva V'Chaloma writes, that before the Tzimtzum, the Rambam is Tzodek Lagamre, that Mor Nevuchim is the only way to go, that we know absolutely nothing and we can know absolutely nothing. And so, when a person accepts the ontological reality of safek, not the safek, the symptomatic safek of Amalek, but rather the root source of safek that HaKadosh Baruch Hu planted in reality, that finds expression in the Tzimtzum, in the Eitz Hadas, in the Ilana D'Sveika, and extends into each and every one of our lives, and it gives us the shape of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So when we accept that, then we begin to live with a certain sense of satisfaction, because I don't have to run for some false sense of certainty right now. I can sit in the sugya. I can wander around in the sugya. There doesn't have to be a destination in the sugya. It's the limud haTorah lishma itself, which is far beyond certainty or lack of certainty. Psak halacha is a different inyan. Aliba de Hilchasa is a different inyan, but the lumdus of it, the sha'ashuin de oraisa, the playfulness of Torah, which is movement without direction. It's an acceptance of, even if I'm wrong in my svara, nevertheless, that svara is true because it was a havamina. As Rav Simcha Bunim says, that we have to take every havamina in the Gemara very seriously, because in truth, the entirety of reality is one extended havamina. Again, the havamina is real. It's not fake. It's a real thing. It exists, but it's still, we don't have the clarification, the maskana of the sugya yet, which is when, Uba Kadosh Baruch Hu v'shachat l'malach hamavas. That's the maskana. So we know now that the havamina that we live with is still oimid v'tali. We know it's tali b'safek. And it's the best we have, but nevertheless, we have to take it seriously. And the process, practically speaking, so one more place to kind of prove the role that safek has in Avodas Hashem, and at the heart really of what the Torah is coming to tell us, is the Torah of the Arizal. The Arizal And I mean, the Arizal was the Arizal. The Arizal gave us a Torah of Vada'ut. There's certain poskim that hold that the Arizal has the capacity, that the words that the Arizal says are seen, begeder divrei nevuah. And that the poskim are not choylek on what the Arizal brought. Why? I had the schus of being in Rav Matel Zilber Shlita, the Stachina Reb's Chabura, for a few years when I got married and I was living in New York. And we came into the cheder of Rav Matel, of the Stachina Rebbe, who's just a goyin mufla and a clarified mind and a tzaddik who is just shining a light of ancient days. It was the first place that I tasted in my recent memory menucha. That was my first experience. I remember his legs would jut out from under the desk, and we were sitting there, and it was like 5 Americans. It was a strange thing that we had this chus, and seeing his legs like crossed, I remember like, this is like a place of calmness in a stormy sea. And so one night we walked in, it was a Sunday night, and Rav Mata was really upset. Rav Mata was really bothered. And we asked what had happened, and he said there were 2 Bachrim who came in, and they asked him, how do we know with validity that the words of the Arizal are true and certain? And Rav Mata was only able to answer, Zakin Mamre, and again, without getting into the reality of where these ideas are and how these ideas are and what these ideas are, the certainty that we have in the source of the Divrei Tzadikim is not based on the evidence that gives us clarity as to that certainty. At least I can only speak for myself. It starts with Emunah, then it goes through wisdom, and then it ends with Emunah. Because in the end of the day, Derech Emunah B'charti. David HaMelech said it, I have chosen the path of faith. There's no arguing with that rationality. There's no arguing with that decision to choose faith, to choose to believe in something. It's like a child who knows the deepest wisdom of emotional theory, which is just cause. Don't ask me why, just cause. This is how I'm feeling right now. You want to ask me why? It doesn't make any difference. This is what it is. Derech Emunah B'charti. There is no question, there is no event, there is nothing that can come and push a person off of that place of tekifus, of I have chosen faith. It's not based on rationality, it's not based on anything. Don't bring me questions based on evidence and observations, because that's not what it's based on. It's based on a place higher than rationality, higher than knowledge. From that place, the tools of rationality and knowledge take shape, and they allow us to uncover more and more depth to our faith. But in the end of the day, as Purim teaches us, and Gantzir Purim, the entire year is Purim, is that Tachlis Hayadiyah Shaloneda, that the apex of wisdom is coming to a place of not knowing. So when it comes to the Arizal, back to what Rav Matel said, Rav Matel's tekifus and saying the unfathomability of how one can question the words of the Arizal, and I'm just using this as an example, but the depth of certainty is not necessarily based on the historic knowledge or the academic understandings or the manuscript work. All of those things are Tosefes Kishut. Those are adornments that allow a person to grasp the subject matter in a deeper way so as to give them shape to have more emunah from it. The purpose of Torah, especially Pnimiyas HaTorah, is medicinal. One does not ask to check that once, if it's being prescribed, if I know that I'm sick, then I'm not going to spend my entire life trying to validate and verify and prove beyond a reasonable doubt the workability of every element of that medication. I'm going to accept it based on faith. And that immovability when it comes to the words of our tzaddikim, especially the Arizal and the Gra and the Baal Shem Tov and the Rashash and the Ramchal and Rav Chaim Brisker and the house of the Soloveitchiks, everybody comes. Nahar Yoitze Mi'eden. The Arizal was a Gilui or Mufla Remala that came into this world to give us an illumination of a path that has given birth to Pnimiyas HaTorah in a way that we would have never been capable of receiving. As Rabbi Nachman says, before the Tzaddikei Emes are revealed in the world, there was the possibility of functioning as a Jew without his kashrus to the tzaddikim amitim. Once the tzaddikim amitim are revealed in the world, then one no longer has the possibility of functioning. So before the Arizal, fine. There were tzaddikim who didn't have the Arizal, and there's no need to force those tzaddikim into the Arizal. That's wrong to those tzaddikim, and it's wrong to the Arizal. They're all saying the same thing ultimately. But after the Ari, what we have is the tekifus of the Ari, which the Leshem says is ultimately just to bring us back to the tekifus of the Zohar HaKadosh. And again, Rav Matel's response with regards to the writings of Rabbeinu Azrizal is also true with regards to the Zohar HaKadosh in the light of Rashbi. That the Baal Sulam famously said, he said with regards to the recent scholarship of the Zohar HaKadosh, He says, I'm not really bothered by any of this. Why? Because if it was proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the Zohar HaKadosh was written by a 12th, century Tana, a 12th century mystic, then it just would prove that he was bigger than Rashbi. He says, because in truth, my heart is not settled until someone proves to me that it was written by one of the Nevi'im, and ultimately I believe deeply that it was given over to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai in the same kind of peh as Torah Shebechsav. Again, the tzaddikim understand the certainty that is deeper than certainty and provability. It's a certainty of choosing it. And the Arizal came down to get, all of this is to say that the Arizal came down to clarify what Rav Steinsaltz referred to as the only really workable kind of Jewish theology, so to speak. And one would assume that the Arizal is speaking from a place of absolute clarity, b'derech Ruach HaKodesh, b'derech Gilui Eliyahu, and it's kifus that holds, and that he's going to clarify, and then we're going to struggle with the doubts, etc. But when one is learning the writings of the Arizal, in Eitz Chaim, and again, Eitz Chaim, to move away from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, what happens is, first and foremost, you encountered Tzimtzum, that's the first thing. Then you encounter Shiur Sakelim, which is the next thing. So there's like a dual trauma, there's a concealment, and then there's a shattering. All of this, which is again, deliberate. All of this is there to show how it could be that there could be a human being who is caught of Tali, Amud V'Tali, in Safek, how that could come from Havadai Shemo Kenti Lasso. How can Safek actually emerge from certainty itself and not be a deviation from certainty, which is what we're trying to describe. And so when you're going through the writings of the Arizal and Eitz Chaim, when you come to the highest place, when you come to the parts of Atik Yoimin, the place of Reisha Delois Yada, Adar is Rosh Tevos, Reisha Delois Yada, the unknowable head, that place of unfathomability, that place where the mind is going to be forced to really encounter the highest point. So what we find is an incredible thing. Rav Chaim Vital, who was the precise student of Rabbeinu HaArizal, he says, I'm mesupek as to what I heard here. I don't remember. There's 5 sveikos. I don't know how the highest parts of Reisha Delois Yada, of Atik Yoimin is built. I don't know what I heard. It's not that I don't remember. There are many times where Rav Chaim Vital says, I don't remember whether I heard this or I heard that. Here it's I'm mesupek as to which one I heard. And these sveikos make their way into Eitz Chaim and they're studied by the Meforshim, and it's the highest place of the system. So you come to the highest place of what you imagine to be the clarity of the tzaddikim, and you encounter something referred to as the sveikos of Reisha Delois Yada, the doubts of the unknowable head. And not only that, but Rav Chaim Vital says as follows, and these sveikos are hinted to by Yeshaya Hanavi when he says, V'hispia b'tzachzachos nafshecha. Tzachzachos, this questionability of clarity, is the place where Yeshaya Hanavi had these doubts. Meaning it wasn't only Rav Chaim Vital who had doubts, but it was Yeshaya Hanavi who brought these doubts into reality. This orientation of there being places at the highest level of experience where I could only grasp them by way of being a doubting creature and not being able to have accessibility to certainty. And not only that, but Rav Chaim Vital writes, V'yesh od sveikos bego v'lo zachisi bahen. Not only that, but there are more sveikos which I haven't been zoicha to. All of the Meforshim, the Ramchal, the Tomei Chaim Zachu, they all yell, zoicha to sveikos? What do you mean there's more sveikos that you weren't zoicha to? Elama, as Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov, the Ramchal, Rav Yitzchak Morgenstern has basically an encyclopedic mimer on this sugya, but suffice it to say that all of the tzaddikim come and say that the sveikos here are the transformation of how we conceive Safek. These sveikos are in truth the highest point of awareness where I come to realize that my human mind, the graspability of the human mind is limited. I can't know with certainty, not because there's no certainty above, but because the certainty above shatters the tools that the human mind is stuck in. That it's not is A true or is B true that causes these sveikos. The Ramchal says it's a din Safek. It's a din safek. It's an existence of safek. It's a safek atzmi. It's not something that was clarified, now it's concealed, and therefore I have to unconceal it to come back to clarification. It's both and at the very same time. It's the heart of Emunah, which is the excluded middle of rational logic, which says A and B, which are opposites, can't exist at once. Adarabba, Klal Yisrael say, not only is that not true, but that's the crowning jewel of our avodah. That place of Kesser, of Reisha Delois Yada, that it's A and B at once. The reason I'm besafek is because both possibilities are true at once. All possibilities are true at once. Every moment contains the potentiality of all moments. There's nothing that has happened from the beginning of creation up till the point that we're in that is not available to a person on a spiritual level in each and every moment of experience. And it's up to us how much we slow down the duration. Each day, each moment, this is the gradational growth of Kabbalah, as we see from the Arizal to the Rashash to the Torah's Chacham, who is the Rashash's Talmud Mufak, that the Arizal spoke on a general level. This is what happens throughout the year. Or let's say this is what happens this is what happens throughout the year. The Rashash says this is what happens throughout the day. And the Torah's Chacham comes along and says, forget all about that. This is what happens every time I glance at anything in reality. Anytime there's any experience, it has the sum total of all possibilities. And if that's true, then I can't ever truly know which one is absolute here. It's very quantum. The undecidability factor at the heart of all things is that the way I choose to orient myself is the vada'ut in the moment. The path that I choose in accordance with Psak Halacha, which is the undoing of doubt, and Das Torah, in whatever way I orient myself to my Rabbanim and my Tzaddikim, based on all of the information that I have behind me, all of the experience of all of the Tzaddikim and the ancestors, have led me to this place of Hachras HaMetzias in this place. But it's not because all the other possibilities are not true. It's because to be a Yid in this world means to live in the secret of Bechira, which is choosing certainty out of infinite possibility at every moment. And therefore, when you go up to that place of Keser, when you go up to that place of Reshad Lo Asyada, and you're done trying to be a human being who lives in this world with grasp and the desire towards perfection or knowledge, the light that is mitnotzetz, that shines forth in Adar and Adar Beis and Purim, this knowledge of just being an ape, an os kuf, which is aping the Shekhinah, which is ultimately just trying to pretend, trying to figure out what language is from a place of not knowing. And in that place, a person is mamtik the sveikos. A person comes to accept, I don't know, and therefore I am going to choose the path that I am on as if I know. And I'm not going to grasp too tightly at reality as if I know with absolute certainty. I'm going to allow my fingers to open up. The tefach soichik and the tefach oitzev. Chazal have two measurements. A tefach oitzev is when the fingers are clenched. A tefach soichik is when the fingers are opened up. Both are attempts at grasp. Both are attempts at knowledge. The truth of doubt that the apex of the system is not to come and embrace ignorance, God forbid. But rather it's to teach us the secret, bless you, of learned ignorance at the heart and limit point of all knowledge. Every sugya brings a person back to the Emunah Kol Zos. Even Shema Yisrael brings me right back to the Emunah Kol Zos. In the end of the day, truth leads to faith rather than faith leading to truth. And again, truth, faith, truth, faith, truth, faith. The ceiling over here is the truth of the moment, right? But when I reach that ceiling, it becomes the faith of the next level. The highest level is always revealing to us that what I thought I know, I didn't know anything. Tachlas yadiyah shelo neda. Kashnitzer Magid, and with this I'll end because I want to try and answer questions. I know this is all, again, just my understanding. But, Tachazi, come and learn. Rav Itchemeyer has a 100-page mimer on the sugyos of Lasbia b'tzachsachos nafshecha and the sugyos of Reshad Lo Asyada and its sveikos. It's mufurash b'chol tzadikim. But the Kashnitzer Magid has an amazing teaching. It says, Asei l'charav v'tesalik min hasafek. Generally speaking, we say that it means find for yourself directionality, connect to Moshe Rabbeinu, who's also the doubt of the Chodesh Adar, dying and being born. Moshe Rabbeinu dies and he's born within each and every Yid because the burial place is in the heart of each and every Yid, which is why Lo Yadda Ish Es Kfuraso, as the Mori Naim says, I don't know where he's buried because I can't know the truest form of myself. And for now, Moshe Rabbeinu continues to be buried in Mul Beis Pa'or, that place of not knowing whether he accessed the 49th gate or the 50th gate. We're told he only got 49, but in the end, Har Nevo is Nun Bo. He lives wedged in between that place of knowing and not knowing. Rabbi Nachman says that Moshe is Gematria 345 because he stands wedged between Ratzon, which is 346, desire, and Shmad, which is heresy, 344. That the das of Moshe is always in that in-between place of knowing and not knowing at the same time. The knowledge of faith and the faith of knowledge. And the Kashnitzer Magid says, Asei l'charav, find for yourself that tzaddik, Mordechai HaTzaddik. There's no Purim without Mordechai HaTzaddik. Without Mordechai HaTzaddik, then Purim would be Bahala Lagamrei. Even with Esther Malka. The secret of the tzaddik, the secret of a mashpia, of a rebbe, of Torah, is the secret of Mordechai HaTzaddik. Mordechai HaTzaddik is the vada'ut, the certainty at the heart of all of the sveikos. That no matter what's happening on Purim, we're hearing Megillah. And any notion that we think we're grasping what's being grasped on Purim is a limitation of Purim. Purim does its job, whether a person is asleep or intoxicated. And so Zak the Kashnitzer Magid, v'tisalik min hasafek, if you want to be masalik yourself from your orientation to this world, you want to have hispashtus agashmias, you want to connect to Hashem in a way that is beyond the confines of the body and the limitations and the attachments of my anxieties, and you want to live in a place of clarity for a moment, tisalik, you want aliyas haneshama, you want yichud min hasafek. Learn the sugi of Safek, orient yourself to realize that I don't know anything at all, and through that a person is going to grow. It's a suffix atzmi. Even in Lumdis, you have a reality of this. The Bircha Shmuel says that, and again, it's by the symptomatic side of suffix, but the tumma of a sota is the tumma sa suffix, that the suffix itself, the state of suffix that she finds herself in, is the gorim to the tumma itself. Rashi Rav Elchanan also brings it down by whether there's a notion of suffix atzmi or not. But be that as it may, when we orient ourselves to the fact that, okay, I doubt, I'm a doubtful creature, I don't know with certainty, and instead of allowing that to bring me down, I can pick myself up again and say, I never know whether Hashem is with me ba'ofen shel yesh or ba'ofen shel ein, but I know Hashem is always with me. I fix that chet of the Nachash who says, Hanachash hasiyeni yesh ve'ein, which leads to the pagam of Amalek, which is Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu ayin. And on Purim we're mahapechid, and we say Chayin if inish lebesume bepurya ad lo yada. Besume again, sleep, intoxication, however a person does it. But what is Chayiv inish lebesume? If we look at the osios of inish, we see that inish is also ein yesh. It's the same language as Hasieni, it's the same language of what we encounter with Amalek. And when we read about Amalek in Zachor, we find that even there, even the mitzvah to be moichek Amalek, there's a doubt by. The doubt infiltrates even the very nature of erasing doubt. And what do? We learn it twice. V'gam, 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 v'gam. The whole Or of Purim is doing it twice. I don't know. Lo sira lebesa mishalei ki chobesav lavushanim. I'm not afraid. Why? Because the entire house is engarbed in clothing. Al tikra shanim, says the Zohar Kadosh, ela shnayim. Do things twice. Aleph and Beis. Other Aleph and other Beis. That's the way of being miskaber over suffix. I don't know, let me just do things twice, let me do it with more tekifas. And through that we'll be zocha to a light of Ad Yada, to be matakein the chet of Eitz Hadas, and to be zocha to the das of Mashiach, Be'ezras Hashem.